Naomi Osaka just revealed the dark truth about her WTA absence: 4 Grand Slams, millions in endorsements, and the tour turned its back on her. Here is what she is finally saying, and more importantly, here is what the data actually proves. Most people looked at her return to the tour in Brisbane and saw a rusty former champion shaking off the cobwebs of maternity leave. They saw the unforced errors flying off the forehand wing and the footwork that looked a step slow, and they assumed it was just physical. But if you look at the draw sheets from the last 6 months, and if you read the fine print of the WTA Rulebook regarding special rankings, you will see a completely different story. This was not just a player struggling to find her range. This was a systematic failure of the infrastructure designed to protect returning mothers. Today, we're going to look at the receipts that explain why Naomi Osaka felt isolated, why her ranking points did not reflect her level of play, and exactly how much money and leverage was lost in the chaotic months following her comeback. We have the audio from the press conferences that hinted at the tension, the Hawkeye traces that show the tactical shifts she was forced to make, and the cold hard math of the WTA ranking system that punished her for becoming a mother. To understand the magnitude of this fallout, we have to go back to the moment the return was announced. The public narrative was a fairy tale. The queen returns to reclaim her throne. But the reality inside the locker room was a nightmare of logistics and bureaucracy. When a player steps away from maternity leave, they are granted a special ranking. This allows them entry into tournaments based on their previous standing. It sounds fair on paper, but here's the loophole that crushed Osaka. The special ranking gets you into the tournament, but it does not get you a seed. That distinction is the difference between a deep run and a first-round exit. Because she was unseeded, Naomi Osaka was thrown to the wolves immediately. In Brisbane, she drew a dangerous Karolina Pliskova in the second round. At the Australian Open, she drew Caroline Garcia in the first round. These are matches that usually happen in a quarterfinal or semifinal. The WTA computer algorithm that generates these draws does not care about narratives. It only cares about the number next to your name. And because that number was effectively 0, Osaka was treated like a qualifier. Look at the footage from her match against Garcia in Melbourne. You can see the frustration building in her player box. Her team knows that physically, she is hitting the ball with the same pace as she did in 2021. The radar gun confirms her serve was clocking in at 118 miles per hour. That is not the issue. The issue is that she is playing top 20 tennis against a top 20 opponent in the first round, while other seeded players are easing their way into the tournament against wildcards ranked outside the top 100. This is the structural disadvantage that nobody talks about. The physical toll of playing high-intensity, finals-level tennis in the first round is unsustainable. You can see it in the unforced error count in the second set of that Garcia match. It skyrocketed to double digits. That is not choking. That is fatigue from playing red-line tennis from the very first ball because the ranking system refused to protect her seed. The tension reached its boiling point at Roland Garros. This is the smoking gun of the entire season. Naomi Osaka versus Iga Swiatek in the second round. This should have been the final. It was the best clay court player in the world against the best hard court player in the world on a collision course way too early. And for 2.5 hours, Osaka played the best tennis we have seen from her in 3 years. She had match point. She was up 5-2 in the third set. This is where the psychological warfare of the tour comes into play. Look at the replay of the point at 5-3 deuce. Osaka misses a backhand by millimeters. The Hawkeye trace shows it landed just on the wrong side of the line. If that ball lands in, she likely wins the match, and the narrative of her entire comeback changes instantly. Instead, she loses that game. Then she loses the set. Then she loses the match. The aftermath of that loss is where the rift with the tour began to widen. In the press conference afterwards, Osaka was gracious, but if you listen closely to her tone, you can hear the resignation. She realized that the margin for error was non-existent. Because of her low ranking, she could not afford a single slip-up. A seeded player can have a bad day in the second round and still survive. Osaka had to be perfect just to reach the third round. This creates a pressure cooker environment that is toxic for mental health, which is the very thing she stepped away to protect. The financial implications of this are staggering. We are talking about millions of dollars in prize money left on the table, not because she couldn't hit the ball, but because the draw gods were against her. Sponsorship contracts often have performance bonuses tied to ranking thresholds and deep runs in majors. By crashing out early in Australia and France, those bonuses were likely voided. Let us talk about the coaching situation, because the player box is always the truest reflection of what's actually happening behind the scenes. The split with Wim Fissette was a shock to the system. Fissette is one of the most calculated tactical minds in the game. He left Osaka to work with Qin Wen Zheng and then came back. That kind of carousel doesn't happen when things are stable. It happens when there is panic. When Fissette returned, it was a signal that Osaka realized she needed a ruthless tactician to navigate this minefield of a ranking system. But even Fissette looked helpless during some of those early losses. There is a moment in the match against Danielle Collins where the camera cuts to Fissette and he's not even shouting instructions. He's just staring at the court. He knew the tactical plan was sound, but the draw was simply too difficult to overcome with a player who was still finding her match rhythm. The WTA has a rulebook that is hundreds of pages long, but the section on maternity leave is surprisingly thin compared to the complexity of the situation. The tour operates on a 12-month rolling calendar. You are defending points you earned 52 weeks ago. When you are out for a year, you have 0 points to defend, which sounds good, but you also have 0 points in the bank. You are starting from the bottom of the mountain while everyone else is already at base camp. The special ranking is supposed to be the Sherpa that helps you up, but it only carries your bags to the entrance. After that, you are on your own. There have been calls from other players, including Victoria Azarenka, who sits on the player council, to change this. They argue that returning mothers should be seeded if their special ranking would warrant a seed. If that rule had been in place, Naomi Osaka would have been seeded inside the top 16. She would have avoided Garcia, she would have avoided Swiatek until the second week. She almost certainly would have made the quarterfinals of at least one major. The difference between a second-round loss and a quarterfinal appearance is roughly 400 ranking points. If you add up the points Osaka lost because of these brutal draws, she would comfortably be inside the top 20 right now. Instead, she has been scrapping to get back inside the top 50. This affects her entry into future tournaments. It forces her to play qualifiers or rely on wildcards, which are never guaranteed. The wildcard situation is another layer of politics. Tournament directors love Osaka because she sells tickets, so she gets the wildcards, but relying on the charity of tournament directors is not a strategy for a 4-time Grand Slam champion. It creates a dynamic where she feels indebted to the tournament, which adds more pressure to perform. You can see this in her body language during the pre-tournament media blitzes. She is doing more press than anyone else because she knows she is the golden ticket for the organizers, even if her ranking says she is nobody. We also need to examine the surface speeds. The tour has been trending slower, the balls are fluffing up larger, and the courts are grittier. This neutralizes the biggest weapon Osaka has, which is her first strike power. When the courts are slow, it's harder to hit through the opponent. It forces longer rallies. Longer rallies require more movement and more endurance. For a player returning from maternity leave, endurance is the last thing to come back. The explosive power is there, but the ability to grind out 20-shot rallies for 3 hours is something that takes months of match play to build. The tour knows this, the schedulers know this, yet they consistently put her on the night session matches, which tend to be slower and heavier due to the drop in temperature. It's a subtle disadvantage, but at this level, every 1% matters. The handshake at the net after these losses tells you everything you need to know about the respect she still commands, but also the vulnerability she exposed. Opponents used to fear Naomi Osaka. They would walk onto the court defeated. Now they see blood in the water. They know that if they can just extend the rallies and keep the ball deep, she will eventually misfire. The aura of invincibility is gone, and it was stripped away not by a decline in talent, but by a ranking system that stripped her of her armor. The bad blood is not between Osaka and the other players. The locker room actually seems very supportive. The bad blood is between the player and the institution. The silence she is breaking is about the realization that the system is not designed for longevity. It is designed to churn through talent. There is a financial cost to the tour as well. When your biggest star is eliminated on day 2 of a 2-week tournament, the ratings drop. The ticket sales for the second week soften. You would think the WTA would do everything in their power to protect their asset, but the rigid adherence to the rulebook prevented them from using common sense. They prioritized the integrity of the computer algorithm over the commercial and competitive reality of the sport, and now they are paying the price. Naomi Osaka is playing a lighter schedule to preserve her body, which means fewer appearances and less revenue for the tour. It's a lose-lose situation created by bureaucratic inflexibility. Look at the serve placement data from her last 3 tournaments. She is going for the lines more than ever. Her risk tolerance has gone through the roof. Why? Because she feels she has to end points early. She does not trust her legs in the long rallies yet, and she does not trust the draw to give her an easy match to find her rhythm. So she is redlining every serve. When it works, she looks unstoppable. When it misses, she looks amateur. This high variance style is a direct result of the pressure placed on her by her ranking. She is playing desperate tennis because the math dictates that she has to. So what is the next step? Osaka has hinted that she is re-evaluating her schedule. She is looking at the Asian swing and the indoor hard courts as her salvation. These are faster surfaces where her power pays dividends, but the damage to her ranking is already done. She is defending nothing for the rest of the year, which is the silver lining. Every match she wins is pure profit in terms of points, but the climb is steep. She needs a title, not a quarterfinal, a title. That is the only way to jump the queue and get back into the seeded positions before the next Grand Slam. Without a seed, the cycle will repeat itself. She will draw a Rybakina or a Sabalenka in the first round, and we will be back to square one. The tragic irony is that Naomi Osaka returned to the tour to inspire her daughter and to prove that you can have it all. And she is proving it, but she's doing it with a handicap that no male player has ever had to face. The ATP has protected rankings, but the physical toll of childbirth is unique to the WTA. The tour's failure to adjust the rules to reflect this biological reality is the core of the controversy. They treated a pregnancy like an elbow injury, and that false equivalency cost Osaka a year of her prime. When you watch her next match, do not just watch the ball. Watch her feet between points. Watch her eyes when she looks at her box. Watch the way she hesitates before going for a winner. That is the scar tissue of a season spent fighting the system. The talent is still there. The serve is still there. But the trust in the tour is gone. And once that trust is broken, it is very hard to repair. The silence has been broken, and now the ball is in the WTA's court to fix the mess they created before their biggest star decides that the struggle is no longer worth the reward.